You ever wake up and feel like you're playing a role in your own life? Like at any moment, someone's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, yeah, you don't actually belong here. That quiet fear doesn't scream. It whispers. It follows you to work, to school, into relationships, even into moments you're supposed to enjoy. And the scary part isn't that you fail. It's that even when you succeed, it still feels fake. Like it doesn't count. Like you somehow tricked the world into believing you're more capable than you really are. Picture this. You're sitting in a room full of people who seem confident, sure of themselves, grounded. They speak clearly. They laugh easily, and you're there too, nodding, smiling, saying the right things. But inside, your mind is racing. You're thinking, if they really knew me, if they saw what's going on in my head, they'd realize I don't deserve to be here. Your heart beats a little faster. Your shoulders tense. You feel like an actor who forgot his lines, but somehow keeps getting away with it. What is wild is that this feeling doesn't just hit people who are lost or struggling. It hits students at the top of their class, professionals with impressive titles, creators with millions of views, parents who everyone else thinks have it all together. On the outside, life looks fine, sometimes even great. But on the inside, there's this constant doubt, quietly asking, who do you think you are? Maybe you felt it after a compliment. Someone says, you did an amazing job. And instead of feeling proud, your brain instantly searches for excuses. Luck, timing, help from someone else, anything but your own ability. Or maybe you feel it when you scroll through social media and see people your age doing better than you. Even if you're doing okay, it suddenly feels like you're behind. Like you missed a memo everyone else got. If this sounds familiar, let me say this right now. You're not broken. You're not weak. And you're definitely not alone. In fact, if this story already feels a little too real, do me a quick favor. Hit like and subscribe. Not because it helps the channel, but because it helps you. It's a small way of saying, yeah, I want to understand this part of myself better. And trust me, you're going to want to hear where this goes. Here's the part nobody tells you. That feeling of being an imposter usually doesn't come from incompetence. It comes from awareness. From caring, from having enough self-reflection to question yourself. The problem is, your mind doesn't stop at questioning. It builds a courtroom in your head, and you're always the one on trial. Think back to when this feeling might have started. For some people, it goes all the way back to childhood, being praised only for results, not effort. Being compared to siblings, cousins, classmates, being told, directly or indirectly, that love and approval had conditions. You learned early on that being good enough meant performing well, and when performance became your identity, fear wasn't far behind. So now, as an adult, every success feels fragile, temporary, like a house built on sand. You tell yourself, this time went okay, but next time they'll see the real me. You raise the bar higher and higher, not to grow, but to protect yourself from being exposed. Rest feels undeserved. Confidence feels dangerous. Because if you relax, if you believe in yourself too much, the fall will hurt more. And the cruel irony is this: the more capable you become, the stronger the imposter feeling can get. Because now there is more tulos, more expectations, more eyes watching. So you keep pushing, but you never arrive. You keep achieving, but you never feel achieved. At some point you might even start disconnecting from your own life, going through the motions, smiling at the right times, saying, I'm fine, when you don't even know what fine would feel like anymore. You're present, but not fully. Successful, but not satisfied. Alive, but not at home inside yourself. And deep down, there's one question you're afraid to ask out loud. What if this feeling never goes away? What if this is just who I am? That question hangs there, unanswered, heavy. Because if the problem isn't your job, your skills, or your circumstances, then the problem might be the story you've been telling yourself for years. A story where you're always almost enough, but never quite. And once that story takes root, it doesn't just affect how you see yourself. It starts shaping every decision you make. That story starts making decisions for you long before you realize it. It decides what opportunities you go after and which ones you quietly avoid. It whispers that you should stay where you are, because at least here, people already expect less. It convinces you to shrink your dreams just enough, so failure won't be too embarrassing. You tell yourself you're being realistic, responsible, mature. But deep down, there's a different reason. You're afraid of being seen too clearly. You might notice it when you hesitate before speaking up, even though you know the answer, or when you over-prepare for things that others seem to handle casually. You reread messages before sending them. You replay conversations hours later, wondering if you sounded stupid. You take feedback not as information, but as evidence. Proof that the voice in your head was right all along. And relationships don't escape this either. In fact, they often make it worse. When someone gets close to you, really close, the fear changes shape. It's no longer about being exposed as incompetent. You start thinking, if they knew how insecure I am, how unsure, how messy my thoughts can be, they wouldn't stay. So you manage yourself. You perform. You become what you think is acceptable. Sometimes that means being the helpful one, the reliable one, the listener who never asks for too much. Other times it means being impressive, funny, smart, always on. Either way, it's exhausting because you're not relating as yourself. You're relating as a version you believe is safer to love. And here's the quiet tragedy. The more you hide, the lonelier you feel. Even when people are around, even when they care, because they're connecting with the mask, not the person underneath. And you can't feel fully seen if you never fully show up. What makes this even more confusing is that on paper, your life might look fine. Maybe even better than fine. You might be doing what you were supposed to do, following the plan, checking the boxers. And yet, there's this constant background tension, like you're waiting for something to collapse, or for someone to figure it out, or for the moment when you finally admit to yourself that you don't actually feel like this life is yours. At some point, you might try to fix the feeling by doing more, working harder, learning more, improving yourself endlessly. You think if you just become good enough, smart enough, confident enough, the imposter feeling will disappear. So you chase growth, but it's fueled by fear, not curiosity. And fear never feels satisfied. No matter how much you accomplish, the finish line keeps moving. Because the problem was never your ability. It was the belief that your worth is conditional, that you have to earn your place every single day. That rest is laziness. That confidence is arrogance. That being human is a liability. You might even start envying people who seem effortlessly confident. People who aren't afraid to be wrong, who take up space without apologizing. And you wonder what they have that you don't. Some secret ingredient. Some missing piece. But most of the time, it's not that they're better. It's that they're not constantly putting themselves on trial. Here's something most people don't realize. The imposter feeling thrives on silence, on assumptions that never get questioned, on stories that feel true because they're familiar, not because they're accurate. You've been living inside a narrative that started long ago, written by moments when you felt small, overlooked, or not enough. And over time, you stopped noticing it was just a story. But every once in a while, something cracks the surface. Maybe it's burnout, or a sudden wave of emptiness after reaching a goal you worked years for. Maybe it's a moment where you finally slow down and ask yourself, why am I doing all this? And the answer, Dosan, te come easily. Because you've been so busy proving yourself, you forgot to check in with yourself. That's usually when the discomfort gets louder, when the mask starts feeling heavier, when the life you've built starts feeling slightly misaligned. Not wrong enough to leave, not right enough to stay, just uncomfortable enough to keep you awake at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling like you're wasting something important but not knowing what. And the scariest realization begins to form. What if this isn't about confidence at all? What if the reason you feel like an imposter isn't because you don't belong, but because you've been living disconnected from who you actually are? That, though, lingers. Because if that's true, then fixing this isn't about becoming someone new. It's about facing something you've been avoiding for a very long time, and that's where things start to get uncomfortable. Once you start questioning that old story, things don't magically get better. In fact, for a while, they might feel worse. Because the moment you stop running on autopilot, you begin to notice how tired you really are. Tired of proving, tired of performing, tired of carrying an invisible weight that nobody else seems to see. You realize how much of your energy has been spent trying to earn permission to exist as you are. This is usually the point where people get scared and go back to what's familiar. They tell themselves they're overthinking, that everyone feels this way, that it's not that deep. And maybe that's true to some extent, but brushing it off doesn't make it disappear. It just pushes it back into the background, where it quietly keeps running your life. Because now you can see it. You see how often you second-guess yourself, how you wait for external validation before trusting your own judgment, how your sense of self rises and falls based on other people's reactions. A good day makes you feel worthy. A bad day makes you question everything. Your identity feels unstable, like it's built on feedback instead of values. You might start noticing how hard it is for you to sit with uncertainty, to try something without knowing the outcome, to be bad at something in public. Mistakes don't just feel uncomfortable. They feel threatening, like they confirm your deepest fear that you were never supposed to be here in the first place. And yet, in these moments of awareness, there's also something else, a small sense of relief. Because for the first time, you're not just blaming yourself, you're starting to understand yourself. You're seeing patterns instead of flaws. You're recognizing that this imposter feeling has been trying to protect you, even if it's been doing a terrible job at it. At some point in your life, doubting yourself might have been useful. It kept you alert. It kept you careful. It helped you survive environments where mistakes were punished or confidence wasn't safe. But what once protected you is now limiting you. And your nervous system hasn't caught up to the reality that you're not that person anymore, in that situation anymore. This is where the shift begins. Not by forcing confidence, not by repeating affirmations you don't believe, but by slowly allowing yourself to be real, to say, I don't know without shame, to try without guaranteeing success, to rest without feeling guilty. These small acts might sound insignificant, but to a mind trained on self-judgment, they feel rebellious. You may notice discomfort when you stop over, when you don't immediately justify your choices, when you let silence hang instead of filling it with people-pleasing. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're stepping outside the role you've been playing. And here's something important. Confidence isn't the absence of doubt. It's the willingness to move forward even when doubt is present. The people you admire aren't fearless. They've just learned not to let fear define their identity. They don't see mistakes as proof of inadequacy. They see them as information, as part of the process of being alive and engaged with the world. As this understanding settles in, you might start experimenting, speaking up once when you normally wouldn't, saying no when you usually say yes, choosing what feels aligned instead of what looks impressive. And every time you do, something subtle happens. The world doesn't collapse. Nobody exposes you. You're still here. But there's also grief in this stage. Grief for the time you spent doubting yourself, for the chances you didn't take, for the version of you that believed they had to earn their right to take up space. That grief can be heavy, and many people mistake it for failure. It's not. It's part of letting go, because the more you loosen your grip on that old identity, the more you realize how much of your life has been shaped by fear rather than choice. And that realization can be unsettling. If fear was the driver, then who are you without it? What do you actually want when you're not trying to prove anything? These questions don't have quick answers. And that's okay. This isn't a transformation montage. It's a slow, honest reorientation. One where you begin to trust yourself, not because you're perfect, but because you're present. And just when it feels like you're finally understanding what's been wrong all along, another thought creeps in. If you stop being the version of yourself that's always striving, always achieving, always impressive, will you still be enough? That question sits at the edge of everything, because the final step isn't about doing more. It's about letting go. Letting go sounds simple, but it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Because when you stop defining yourself by achievement, approval, or performance, there's a quiet moment where nothing rushes in to replace it. No script, no role, just you. And that can feel terrifying at first. Not because you're empty, but because you're no longer hiding. This is the moment when many people realize something unexpected. The imposter feeling wasn't proof that you didn't belong. It was proof that you were living slightly out of alignment with yourself. You were measuring your life with someone else's ruler. You were chasing a version of success that looked good from the outside, but didn't feel true on the inside. When you start reconnecting with yourself, the imposter voice doesn't vanish overnight. It gets quieter, less convincing. You notice it show up, but you don't obey it automatically anymore. You start responding instead of reacting. You say, "I hear you," but you don't get to drive. And slowly, your sense of worth shifts. It stops being something you earn and starts being something you allow. You begin to understand that belonging isn't granted by an audience. It's built internally. You don't need to feel confident to move forward. You just need to feel honest. There's a strange freedom that comes with this. You stop needing every moment to prove something. You stop turning your life into evidence. You still care. You still try, but the pressure eases. Failure becomes survivable. Success becomes enjoyable instead of suspicious. You realize that everyone else you once put on a pedestal is just as human as you are. They doubt, they struggle, they improvise. The difference is, some of them learned earlier that self-worth isn't a performance. It's a relationship you build with yourself over time. And here's the truth that changes everything. You were never an imposter in your own life. You were just disconnected from it, living for validation instead of meaning, safety instead of truth. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. This doesn't mean life suddenly becomes easy. It means it becomes yours. You make choices that feel right, not just impressive. You speak from your values, not your fear. You show up imperfectly, but fully. And that's where real confidence grows. Not loud, not flashy, but steady. You might still have moments where the old doubt tries to creep back in. That's normal. Healing isn't linear. Growth isn't clean. But now, you recognize the pattern. You know that the voice saying you, Renato, is just an old echo, not the truth. And one day, you'll catch yourself doing something that used to terrify you, taking up space, saying what you mean, choosing yourself without apology. And you'll realize you're not pretending anymore. You're not waiting to be exposed. You're just living. If any part of this story felt like it was describing you, you're not alone, and you're definitely not behind. A lot of people never stop to question that imposter feeling. They let it quietly run their lives. The fact that you're here, listening, reflecting, means something is already shifting. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this hit the hardest for you, or if you've ever felt like an imposter in your own life. And if you know someone who is struggling with this but can't put it into words, share this with them. Sometimes hearing it from the outside makes all the difference. At the end of the day, you don't need to become someone else to belong here. You just need to stop abandoning yourself. And once you do, you'll realize you were never faking it. You were just finding your way home.